Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, welcome, bienvenue, benvindo, salam alaikum, karibu, ekabo, no, sanudazuwa, aloha. My name is Elsie Kanza, and I'm the Director, Head of Africa at the World Economic Forum. Welcome to our 24th annual African gathering of our communities of leaders from government, business, civil society, and this includes NGOs, religious leaders, cultural leaders, youth leaders, as well as academia. As has been the tradition over the last 2 years, we kick off our meeting welcoming and opening of a conversation. I will say kitendawili, and I need you to respond tega. Kitendawili. Kitendawili. As the face of Africa at the forum, serving Africa and friends of Africa, I beg your indulgence to clarify a few things. Why are we here? In the African tradition, when your neighbor's house is on fire, when tragedy breaks out, the community gathers to console and to address the issue. We fix problems. We do not run away. What are our priorities? One, the missing girls and the broader attack on girls' education is outrageous. Finding them is a top priority. Growth also remains a priority. Africa's progress cannot be held hostage by terrorism. Why Nigeria? Nigeria represents the good and bad news about the Africa Rising story. Success on the one hand and failure on the other. The biggest economy in Africa, with the largest population. 1 in 4 Africans in sub-Saharan Africa is Nigerian. 1 in 5 Africans in Africa is Nigerian. 1 in 6 black person around the world is Nigeria. Nigeria matters to Africa and to the world. Therefore, the conversations here and around the world through digital media, we're very well connected, are very important. Last but not least, as a daughter of a mother who's been serving in the UN peacekeeping force in Côte d'Ivoire for several years, I would also like to recognize the police, the military, and intelligence officers who put their lives at risk for us every day, here and elsewhere. They too have families, and I'm deeply grateful to them too. It is the utmost sacrifice to be ready to die for others to live.
Ladies and gentlemen, friends, I have the great pleasure to introduce to you an extraordinary panel. First, of course, our host, President Jonathan. But then we have also on the stage President Paul Kagame, the President of Rwanda. In some way, Mr. President, you are a role model for economic development. We have Dominic Barton, the head and the global managing director of McKinsey. I don't have to introduce McKinsey, probably the most significant strategic consultancy company in the world. We have Aliko Dangote, probably the most prominent business leader of Africa. And we have Bian Chima, the executive director of Oxfam International, and again I can say probably one of the most admired NGOs in the world for what all you are doing. And John Rice, the vice chairman of GE, also a co-chair of the African summit here. And GE, I don't have to introduce, certainly one of the most significant manufacturing companies, and I underline also manufacturing companies in the world. And the whole session relates to Africa, which is the second fastest growing region, yet only, as we have heard, 1 person in 4 holds stable wage-paying jobs. And our question here is, how can the continent's growth strategies be more inclusive and create jobs? Let me start with you, President Jonathan. As Africa's largest economy and most populous nation, you play a crucial role, and you have presented to us already how you want to create jobs. 50%, more than 60% of your population is still living in extreme poverty. Now, you have this challenge of combining growth on the one hand with creating social inclusion. How will you do it? I know it's a large question, and I need a precise answer.
I need to thank all of you again for coming to Abuja for this program, especially considering the circumstances of the day. Today, my duty is more to listen to the suggestions from the NGOs and other professionals. But precisely what we are doing now is to make sure that we encourage investment in the core sectors of the economy, the real sectors. Jobs can't be created by government directly. Source will not be sustainable. And we are trying to change the thinking of our young people to always think that after graduation or after finishing from a school, the only place you can get a job is government. There is no government that can employ a reasonable percentage of the citizens. So you must encourage the private sector, and you must encourage the private sector to invest in the real sector. So what we are doing as a government is to create that environment where the private sector will see that there are gains to be made. And when you create the environment where the private sector notices that if they invest in this sector or in this area, they will make returns. Definitely, you'll get investors from within the country and outside the country. If you take agriculture, for this is one of the key areas we're trying to use to create that environment. Before this time, we take agriculture as a rural development program. And that's why even the Minister of Agriculture, from the colonial period till today, we call it agriculture and rural development. Now we say, no, agriculture should be shifted away from rural development. But agriculture must be practiced in a country or must be managed in a country as a pure business, from the planting to the mouth, adding value and through the processes. And we're making sure that we are creating that environment for private sector to invest. And the signals are quite interesting. A number of companies, of course, maybe when Dangote will speak and others, they will mention that a number of companies have indicated their commitment to invest huge sums of money in the agri value chain. So is the housing or construction sector. So if you create the environment conducive for private sector to invest in the real sector, then of course jobs will be created. That is the focus of the Nigerian government.
Thank you. It's particularly the creation of an conducive environment, and you mentioned agriculture, certainly also infrastructure. Those areas will, which create the fastest potential for job creation. But President Kagame, you celebrated recently 20 years of peace and development, an extraordinary achievement. What lessons can you share with us which can be applied not only in your country, but across the continent to do what you have done in the last 20 years?
Thank you. Now, if you look at the growth rates across Africa that have been very impressive, the next thing is to say how has this generated or improved the well-being of the people? So here we are talking about people. Because you can easily also get growth rates by few companies, others doing so well, and which means they are doing so well, even the thinking might be doing well on behalf of others. But here we are not talking about doing well on behalf of others. It's not a zero-sum game. It's not a situation where people continue to grow at the expense of others or the others lose. I think we are talking about the principles of equity, equality, and how job creation is actually being achieved. And this means wealth. How does an ordinary person get involved to participate in these activities that also increase what they get as an income? This is what we are talking about. So this is what we have concentrated on in Rwanda, is to say, what is it that we are going to do, encourage the private sector to do the best thing they know how to do, and at the same time, draw in as many people as possible to participate. And so that with the growth we are going to see, it has a relationship with the difference it has made in people's lives. So the policies that have been put in place have this behind them, and the leaders have this political drive, because most of these activities or policies, if you will have to be driven by the understanding at the political level that this is what you want to target and this is what you want to achieve. So we have been learning that if we really concentrate on how much everyone gains without having losers, how many people you bring to participate in these activities, everybody is a winner, and you see growth that relates to the development of many as such. Of course, there will be challenges, but every time when you address the challenge while you're also looking at an opportunity that is related to that challenge, then you easily find the kind of improvement as we have seen. So it's about people. It's about how many does it reach and how many get their lives changed. So the contribution that results out of that as well is huge. If it is a business that impacts people, that means there is a feedback to the business from how people have been impacted, and that also has a tendency to improve the well-being of that business or the profitability of it, if you will, because of the empowerment that has come from or has been generated from these activities. So these are lessons we have learned, and these are things we have continued to try and do, but also target areas that reach many people. Like earlier we were talking about agriculture, we talked about trade, we talked about infrastructure to support all that. I will just give you an example. We found in between 2006 and 2011, by making the kinds of investments we made in agriculture, we reduced poverty by 14%. We lifted 1 million people out of poverty because we knew agriculture affects many citizens. Therefore, we invested with the people in such a way that they were able to have not only food security, but incomes from agriculture that made a difference for them. We're also talking about trade. Here we are talking about Africa and this growth of Africa. But you continue to see also how Africa is not necessarily working together across the board. So we discovered that intra-African trade has huge potential, but how much are we cooperating between and among nations of Africa to make sure that we allow this trade, which involves huge numbers in our populations, to improve their lives. So there are things we should not take for granted, but we know they also work, so we should make them work. This is how we are informed by what needs to be done, and we try and do what needs to be done. Thank you.
Dominic, it's not just an issue of lifting out people of poverty. I think the real challenge is afterwards to integrate them into a prosperous middle class, because that's what creates stability for society. Now, what is the key? You have talked about the potential, or many people have talked about the potential and the size of Africa's middle class in 2020. There's quite some excitement. But what are really the challenges in order to achieve a middle class-based society?
Well, I think the core element actually comes back to the key theme of the conference, and something that you've been pushing a lot, which is around job creation. We can't have a middle class unless we get enough of the job creation. And as President Jonathan mentioned in his speech, we are going to have to create jobs for 120 million people over the next 10 years. That's a tremendous opportunity, because that's going to be a big consuming class, but they're going to need to have the jobs to be able to drive it forward. Already in many countries in Africa, it represents one of the largest consumption markets. If you are in the healthcare business, if you're in the diaper business, you have to be in Nigeria. As I said before, there are more babies born in this country than all of Europe combined. So if you want to be a relevant international company, you better be in this country now. It's not just in the future. But if we go back to how do we create the jobs and so forth, I think there's a number of elements that have to come into place. One is actually around the sector focus, again, which President Jonathan mentioned. There are huge opportunities well beyond the natural resource side of things, and ag food has been talked about. President Kagami's done a lot. Ethiopia, what they're doing on that side, there are a huge number of jobs and businesses that can be created by building out that sector, making it a priority. The second is infrastructure. We're going to need $2.6 trillion of infrastructure. Infrastructure creates jobs. For basically every 100 billion of infrastructure you put in, you create 1 million jobs. And that's a win-win, if you will, in terms of where we drive it. So working the system to be able to enable infrastructure to be built quickly, I think will help drive it through. So these sectors, and healthcare is another one, there's a number of them to focus on, which will, I think, create a very vibrant workforce and therefore the middle class. The other areas I just focus on is vocational training. I think we focus too much on university education. What we need more of are the welders, the electricians, the plumbers, nurses, radiologists, and so forth. And that's an area we need to build out. It's education for employment. We've done surveys actually in Nigeria, in Kenya, in South Africa. We found that employers believe that the people coming out of the system that are graduating only have 30% of the skills that are required to be able to do what they need to do. So we have to think about that education for employment to ensure they're there. And then the final area I just want to talk about is the speed with which one's able to create businesses. A lot of the middle class are entrepreneurs. They're the SME individuals. And I'd actually look again to Rwanda as an example. I believe it was the case in 2009. If you wanted to start a business, it would take you 6 weeks. It would cost you the equivalent of $400, and you have to talk to 10 different ministries to be able to do it. If you look at it today, basically it takes you 6 hours, and there's one website. If you use the website, it's free. If you go physically, it's $20. And so the ability to be able to allow people to build businesses and grow is going to be a key part of this. And then I think Africa, which already is seen as, again, an important market, as I mentioned before, on the consumer side, will be an extremely important market on the broad middle-class consumer side as those people have jobs.
Would you just one follow-up question? Would you agree that Africa, and particularly also Nigeria, are characterized by strong entrepreneurial talents? At least my experience looking at our young global leaders and so on, I'm amazed how many entrepreneurs, young entrepreneurs I find here, despite the not so favorable environment sometimes.
I totally agree. In fact, many of them are out in the room here, and I'd certainly say there's a large number, and I would argue there's the future global champions are sitting here. I'm sitting beside one to my left as we talk. But we're also talking about innovators, because even in banking, we're seeing radically new models. When you can leapfrog, we're actually going to see a lot more innovator entrepreneurs that are here.
Please let's give a big hand to the African entrepreneurs here in the room. Aliko, you are one of those entrepreneurs, and if I look at our competitiveness ranking, the African countries, I would say, are not amongst the top countries. How do you succeed in such an environment? What is your recipe? Can you share with us?
Well, that's secret, but...
Because I'm sure we all want to imitate you and to do the same as you have done.
Well, definitely, yes, you are right. It is not, well, first of all, Your Excellencies, Professor Schwab, other distinguished participants. It is a great pleasure to be here. And I think when you look at, yes, people keep talking about only the bad side, which is very difficult to do business. But there are a lot of opportunities. I mean, when we first started as a company, we were not really spoon-fed. To start with, I remember when we decided to go into manufacturing. This was around 1996, but at around 2003, when we realized that Nigeria is only, 2004, Nigeria was only producing 2 million tons of cement. And we really wanted to have a massive trajectory. How are we going to get over it? And the banks at that time, they were very small. And you won't believe that at that time, we even paid interest up to 42%. And the only money that you could get was 90 days money for long-term investment. But, we are very, very creative. We didn't really say, yes, there is no power, there's no this, there's no that. And we went ahead. The first thing that we did was to decide not to use power from the national grid. And that was one of our successes, really. We said that we're not really going to use power from the national grid. We want to make sure that, we have, reliance on power. And what we did was to create our own power. We had to do about 92 kilometers of gas pipeline. We had to build housing estate. We had to do quite a lot. But, going back, even this morning during the press conference, a lot of people say that, no, the environment is not conducive to do business. I totally disagree. It's not true. We also have to look at this, and the only job for government is to give us the enabling environment. Okay, fine. For example, in Nigeria and a lot of other African countries, they will give you an opportunity for capital allowance. They will give you an opportunity of zero duty and zero VAT on all your machinery because you are creating jobs. They will also give you 5 years of tax holiday. And even the tax holiday, you can choose when you want to start, your tax period. If you think that your volume is low, you can start paying by, your tax, and then, start, enjoying your tax holiday the following year. I mean, I don't really know what somebody is going to look for apart from this. So we've used that, and we went ahead and risk and invest a lot of our money. The biggest challenge that we're facing today is that some of us here in Africa will rather keep the money abroad, not invest in Africa. And by doing that, you are not creating confidence. You have to invest your own money as an African to create confidence for the foreigners to bring in their money. Unless you do that, it's not just going to happen. I mean, the size of company that we're in today, even 5 years or 7 years away, we never ever expected to be this big. But the opportunities are there, and they're enormous. I mean, for example, today we've reached a stage that we say, okay, fine, but where are we going from here? And we're investing a total of $16 billion in the next 4 years to, create a lot of businesses, in, refinery, petrochemical, to make Nigeria self-sufficient in fertilizer. We're doing a fertilizer plant, which is done by about 2.8 million tons, which is more than what Nigeria requires, which we'll export. But the most important of our business today is the agricultural side of it, which we are not in before. And what we are doing right now, we are partnering with the, with the Ministry of Agriculture to do 1 million tons of, rice. We already have gotten a letter that, yes, there is land available in Niger State and also land available in Edo State, which we have 160,000, the other one have been 64,000. In sugar, what we have done, and through Ministry of Trade, Industry and Investment, is to now go ahead to go to most of the areas where, for example, we are even in the Northeast. We're in Adama, where there is Boko Haram. The only way to solve Boko Haram is to create jobs. And that's, so we decided to invest total of $2 billion in sugar alone by making Nigeria self-sufficient in sugar. And we're going to about 6 states. From the northeast, we're going to Taraba and Adama. Northwest, we're going to Kebbi, Sokoto, and Jigawa. And then north central, we're going to Kogi and Kwara. But when you look at all these things, what will this do after we finish investing both the rice and this? Is we are going to have an opportunity to create 180,000 jobs. So is government doing something? Of course, government is doing quite a lot. If the environment is not conducive, how am I going to just go and put in my money and also borrow additional money to invest an area which I've never ever dreamt about, which is agriculture? We're pumping in 2.3 billion. So the opportunities are there. And the only thing that I have to now, tell all of us here is that today, the inter-trade of Africa is actually just about, as of 2012, is about $100 billion only. And $100 billion is less than 15% of the total trade that is happening within Africa. Less than 15%. In Asia Pacific, it's about 40%. Western Europe is about 60%. So we have to learn to trade among ourselves, because what is happening is that majority of what we are consuming, we are importing. And you know what that means? Once you import, it means that you are importing poverty, exporting jobs out. So I think that's what we need to look at. Thank you.
I think we have heard a true entrepreneur, and thank you, Aliko, also for being the first strategic partner of the World Economic Forum from this part of the world. Now, let's go to Oxfam, or to you, Winifred. 60% of Africa's population is still living below poverty line. You see it from a perspective on the ground. What is your explanation, and what can be done in order to resolve this issue?
Well, thanks, Klaus, and I'm very delighted to be here with the excellencies. We work in 33 African countries and other countries around the world, working with poor communities, finding solutions to poverty. We also take on the powerful on issues of social justice. So we take on governments and we take on corporations. But today I find myself so much in agreement with a corporate leader, Aliko. And I'll come to that. Growth in Africa is good, and we are celebrating it, the rise of Africa. But surely we know that millions are being left behind. And why is that so? It's because the growth is coming mainly, not completely, but mainly from discoveries of oil and gas and mineral resources. pumping from the ground and going out and earning revenues. If this growth, and this is really serious for Africa because we are now the second most unequal continent in the world, next to Latin America. 6 out of 10 of the most unequal countries in the world are here in Africa, and this inequality is widening. If we are going to have growth that is more shared, that isn't leaving our youth and our people out, we have to do a few things. Many things, but few are really important. One, it's important that African people, men and women out there struggling every day, working, get free, universally provide free and universal education and health. Health in particular. Because an African man who's out there digging and earning for the country must be able to know that when he falls sick, he'll go to a hospital funded by the government and get health. And this is not rocket science. This is tested. Europe and America and Asia, this was the way they went out of poverty into development. They had to provide health and education for their people. We don't do it, and we don't do it, and that is why growth will continue to rise, but our people would not have the capabilities to be part of that growth. So that's important. When you say it, Klaus, you get told that there is no money for putting in health and education in Africa. You need to bring the private sector. Then you need to pay user fees. But the truth is that the resources for this are there. The African Development Bank has told us that the continent is losing $63 billion every year in illicit financial flows. That is the money that should be funding this. We are told that we have been, as a continent, a net long-term provider of resources of money to other continents. The flow, 1.4 trillion in the last 30 years, flowing out of this continent. What are we doing? What are our governments doing to stop tax dodging, to stop this hemorrhage of resources so that we put it back in our people? That is the question. We are getting into a situation where the business environment, this is where I agree with Aliko here, that we talk about an enhanced business environment in Africa. We have created it. There can't be a more enhanced business environment on earth better than Africa. If you think of the tax holidays, the tax breaks, if you think about the tax dodging, this place, business is making money and paying almost nothing for it. So it's time the business paid their fair share so that money can go back into what is needed. What do I mean? In Africa now, let me give you an example of just Zambia. Zambia earned $240 million from its copper in 2011. But how much went out? 10 billion. $10 billion of copper was exported. What did Zambia earn? 240 million, less than 2.5% for its copper. So resources are there, but Africa has to take the right steps to stop tax dodging, to get the companies to pay their fair share, and there'll be money to put back. So tax dodging, illicit flows should be high on the African agenda. And lastly, when the money comes in, it must go back to create the jobs for our people. So the money must go into agriculture, into industries such as Aliko's. Why should Aliko have to build a power plant for himself to do his industry? Where's the government? Sorry to ask, because the power should be there. He should just go on the grid and build a factory and create jobs. But if he has to go and build an energy plant, that's the role of the government. So we want this money to come back to build the infrastructure, to put in health and education, and to put in agriculture where the jobs will be for our people. So lastly, we want our leaders not to think in terms of the next election. That's the problem. Let them think about the longer term. 50 years, the Chinese premier has just told us he wants to be in Africa, China to be investing here in the long term. So let us see some long-term planning for the continent. Let our leaders make deals that are going to deliver in the long term. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Winifred. John, I will come back to the question of power, but before, let's put it into a bigger framework. There are only 10% of jobs, I think, in Africa which are in manufacturing. And one of the bottlenecks, of course, is electricity. You have solved it in your own way. But what is your advice for Africa to become more competitive, more attractive in manufacturing industries and to secure its power base?
Well, and President Kagame mentioned this, but you can't have sustainable, inclusive economic growth without jobs. And there's a complicated transfer function that leads to the creation of the kind of jobs that deliver sustainable, inclusive economic growth. But it starts with electricity, healthcare, clean water, because without that, you don't have the human capital that you need to develop to do those jobs, to manufacture. And we had an experience last year, which I think is important and indicative right here in Nigeria. We broke ground on a manufacturing facility in Calabar. And the work that we're going to do there is not just wrenches and screwdrivers. This will be sophisticated machining and manufacturing. And the emphasis that President Jonathan and his colleagues put on capacity creation in this manufacturing center, the training and the development to create the right kind of jobs, but not just for the manufacturing that would take place there, also for the supply chain, with as much of that coming from Nigerian companies as possible. That's what companies like ours have to be doing. This is no longer about turning screwdrivers and wrenches. This is now about sophisticated machining, world-class processes, which we think we can do here as well as we can do anywhere. And the reason they have to be world-class is because some of the stuff we do at that facility goes to to support our projects with the Dangote Group. And he's a tough negotiator. He demands the best from us. And whether we do it in Nigeria or we do it in some other country, it has to meet that standard. So the point is, it can be done, but the fundamental building block is electricity, healthcare, clean water, the basics that we take for granted in some countries but are so missing in other countries. Simple decisions about the availability of fuel, offtake agreements which allow for a reasonable, risk-adjusted return. We can complicate it if we want to, but it's very simple. If you put those basic things in place, you will have investors who want to build the power projects, and you will have manufacturers that want to come here and grow with the country.
President Kagame, I think it's exactly what you have in mind in your policies to provide those fundamentals for economic growth. Could you just react rapidly on it?
Yes, that's very crucial. What Mr. Rice and many others have said is important. For example, in our case, we have invested in healthcare systems to make sure that every citizen, in fact, we have a successful healthcare insurance system that goes to every citizen. So healthcare part is important, so that every citizen is served well. 2 is education and training, including vocational and technical training, which has also been talked about. But overall, apart from the general basic things that are very important that should not be ignored, then we come to capacity in a general sense. One of individuals we have invested in education, in training, and so on and so forth, to be able to go out there and do what needs to be done in terms of skills. The other is building capacity of institutions to deliver on what needs to be delivered. In fact, here we have had different collaborations with different institutions. Just one case, we have worked with the Africa Governance Initiative, behind which there is the former Prime Minister of UK, Tony Blair. But this has just been to underscore the importance of capacity, even the businesses we are talking about. In Rwanda, we have tried to develop a business environment that addresses a number of issues that the panelists have already talked about. How does business benefit the investors, the people doing business who want to make their money? But at the same time, this business must also benefit the citizens. How does the linkage get created? It has to be created through capacities that have been developed, whether domestically or even from outside. We are not shy about bringing in a capacity from outside to actually fill the gaps that exist in our own systems. This is how we have been approaching it. So businesses, many things said by the head of Oxfam, very, very true. Some of these things are done deliberately, the mistakes, because they benefit a few, but the others arise out of lack of capacity. There is lack of capacity. There is also people even who have capacity doing just the wrong things. So this is therefore why institutions matter. They must have capacity. The countries must have the kinds of skills required. This is what really in Rwanda we have been trying to focus on, and we find there is good progress and benefits.
Thank you, Mr. President. We unfortunately are at the end of allocated time, and we could continue this discussion quite considerably. And I'm sure that many of those issues will be taken up in the sessions. But I would like to ask you, President Jonathan, a question, of course, a question of actuality, a question which cannot be avoided. We need, of course, the basic ingredients like food, water, health, and so on, but we need also security. And President, would you care to say some words about the difficulty in such a large country like yours to provide this security aspect?
Thank you. Of course, the security is quite challenging, especially looking at the terror attacks recently. The greatest problem Nigeria faces now in terms of the security is this issue of terrorism and kidnapping for ransom. Unfortunately, these are fairly recent in the evolution of security issues in the country. And I can say we not defending what we are doing or what we have done before. Every nation builds capacity based on the challenges you have. The first time a Nigerian was involved in terror was December 2009, where a Nigerian young man, though he grew up abroad, wanted to bring down a plane that was to go to the US. And the reaction of Nigerians then that, oh, no, this is strange. I think because this boy grew up outside this country, because he came from a very wealthy family. So it's not issue of poverty, but issue of extremism. we never knew that we are really moving into crisis. So what I'm saying is that now we are confronted with a strange phenomenon that was never a part of our problems. So it takes time for you to train the people, it takes time for you to build the security architecture, and that is what we are improving on every day. Not too long ago, I gave a total approval of over $1 billion for us to acquire what we require. That is just not enough. But I'm just giving an example. Because these challenges are a bit recent. And I can guarantee that we'll surely bring this under control. Yes, it's difficult for any nation to say that you have a magic wand to wipe out issues of security challenges. Otherwise, maybe a place like US with the money and technology, people wouldn't have been shot today. We hear people being shot today and so on. So no one president can say, yes, in a year, in a month, that my country, there will be absolute peace. But we are working hard, we are training our people, we are building capacity, because we are getting assistance from others that have experienced terror, and they are willing to assist us. I personally have discussed with a number of heads of state, our government, and all the big countries where they have the technology. So these are the areas we are building. As we progress, this will continue to come down.
Thank you, Mr. President. And let me highlight it's not only a Nigerian problem. And if I bring it back to the issue we are discussing here, if we do not succeed to create more inclusive growth, this problem will become a more serious problem everywhere in the world. So let me thank the panelists on your behalf.
Let me really especially thank all of you for accepting to come, especially this time that as a nation we are facing attack of terrorists. Let me appreciate you individually and collectively for your support for us, your sentiments, and in fact, by your presence here in Nigeria at this time, you have already supported us to win the war against terror. If you had refused to come because of fear, the terrorists would have jubilated and even would have committed more havoc. But you are coming here to support us morally. It's a major blow on the terrorists. And by God's grace, we'll conquer the terrorists. Let me use this unique opportunity to appreciate other countries that have expressed their commitment to help us, especially in terms of rescuing these girls that have disappeared from one of our secondary schools. Of course, the Premier of China has been with us since yesterday for a state visit, and the government of China have promised to assist us, and I believe that assistance will come almost immediately. The government of the United States of America, the United Kingdom, and France have also spoken with me and have expressed their commitment to help us resolve this crisis in Nigeria. I believe that the kidnap of these girls will be the beginning of end of terror in Nigeria. Let me also use this opportunity to especially thank the organizers of the World Economic Forum for Africa, Professor Klaus Schwab, thank you, the World Economic Forum in Geneva, and of course the Nigerian Intergovernmental Committee that is has put everything together for us. Looking around the room here, I see my fellow heads of states and government, elder statesmen, a number of them former heads of states and government from around the world, heads of international organizations, and business leaders from across the globe. This is a distinguished gathering, and I am confident that we will have very fruitful and productive conversations as we progress in the next few days. I want to thank Premier Ligachi for his great speech. Of course, you can mark this from the applauses. And of course, especially your first visit to Nigeria. Africans are quite happy with China because you have shown serious commitment in assisting Africa in so many ways. Of course, your speech this afternoon have also shown clearly about your total commitment, and especially considering the theme of this conference, creating jobs and fostering inclusive growth, which is critical in so many ways, critical to the world, critical to Africa, and especially critical to Nigeria. First, the need to create jobs is a global problem. The International Labour Organization estimates that in 2013, over 200 million people were unemployed around the world. And this includes about 75 million young people between the ages of 15 and 24. Practically all countries around the world are concerned about job creation. The developed economies, such as the United States of America, the United Kingdom, and the Eurozone countries, are all monitoring their employment numbers very closely to see if their economies are recovering from the recent global recession. In Southern European countries, such as Spain and Portugal, unemployment rates have also remained high in recent years, some cases above 20%. In fact, there have been many reported cases of reverse migration of young graduates from Portugal and Spain who are now moving back to their former colonies, such as Angola, Brazil, and Mozambique, to seek for jobs. In Africa, we have employment challenges. The unemployment rates today stands about 20%. Of course, in Nigeria, it's about 24%. The second point I want to make is that in Africa, the unemployment problem is compounded by a youthful population. And of course, this is quite critical because that is the population that will need houses, will need a lot of support. A number of countries are doing very well, and I believe the trend will improve. But in Africa, compared to other continents that the population is aging, that of Africa is growing. On the average age, or if you take the median age of the people we meet in the street in Africa is about 20 years. In Asia, it's about 29 years. In Europe, it's about 40 years. That means that 50% of our population are below 20 years. In that case, African leaders have a lot of challenges. At the age of 20, some of them are still going to school. Some of them are pursuing postgraduate qualifications. That means that we are challenged to provide educational facilities, housing, and of course, health challenges and employment. Demographers are also predicting that this youth population is going to grow even further. McKinsey, the consulting firm, has calculated that an additional 122 million workers will enter Africa's labor force by 2020, and that by 2035, the combined size of the African labor force will be greater than that of most of the heavily populated countries in the world, including China. This is daunting, and it's a major challenge to all of us. So that means that job creation is what most African leaders will occupy a greater part of their time thinking. Whenever they are sleeping or when they wake up, is how do we create jobs for this number of unemployed youth, especially the ones that will continue to enter the labor market. This leads me to my third point. What can we do to create more jobs? And how are we addressing this problem in our country, Nigeria? For us in Nigeria, job creation has been the main focus of our ongoing transformation agenda, which is our program to mobilize and diversify the Nigerian economy. Job creation is one of the concerns that keeps me up at night and has been the main theme of our federal government budget in the recent years. Our budgets are structured in a way that will create jobs for our young people. We recognize that the private sector will be the engine of growth and job creation, and we are putting in place the necessary conditions to support the private sector growth, such as ensuring a stable macroeconomic environment, that is low inflation, stable exchange rates, and so on. Investing in critical infrastructure, roads, railways, power sector, the aviation sector, and investing in the development of skills of our people. We have a lot of young people that don't even have the skills, so even if the jobs are there, they may not have the competencies to take these jobs. And that's a major commitment by government to see how young people could be given the skills to take jobs that are available. The Nigerian economy has grown rapidly over the past decade. It's about 7% per annum. Of course, we are now, by the last rebasing of our GDP, we are now the largest economy in the continent and the 26th globally. But this robust economy has not translated into job creation. And that's why government is working very hard. How will we, looking at the economic indices, make sure that we create jobs for our people and also improve on government revenues? That is why we are focused on a number of priority sectors which have high job creating potentials, such as agriculture, manufacturing, housing and construction, and the services sector. And in each of these sectors, we are working to unlock the various obstacles faced by businesses so that they can create jobs for our people. We are learning from the examples of other countries, such as China, to see what they have done in this regard to create jobs for their citizens. Their population cannot be compared to that of Nigeria. So if they are able to create jobs for maybe 1.3 or 1.4 billion people, then our population that is still under 200 million, we should be able to create jobs for our citizens.